I always keep the blooper reels.
Yeah, you never know when you're gonna have to release them.
It becomes like part of our show intro.
Nice. Okay, guys. Well, we're here. It's Crypto Chemistry, joined with Joe over at Forum3. So Dylan here and Max and Joe. Joe, great to have you on the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here and chatting with you guys today.
Yeah, we haven't done one of these restreams in a long time. So really great to revamp and relaunch everything with a guest like you, and also having Max, I guess, is okay, but we'll roll with it, man. So I guess to start off, like we love your story, Joe. You've put it out there on Twitter a bit. So why don't you just kind of introduce yourself for like 2 or 3 minutes, who you are, your background, and your evolution into joining Web3 full time.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I always joke, I call it like the degen hero arc, because it's like it's the story that I feel like so many people in the space that are trying to like break in full time, coming from a background that's non-technical, coming from, experience that really is non-technical. And, when I first started in the space as a hobby, that was, it was so early at that time in 2017 when you and I first met, Dylan, where like the term like full-time crypto, right? It meant you had to either be a trader or a coder, and like those were your only options, right? So for me, for a long time, it was, a hobby in which I made content for and started a podcast and all of those things. And so I got in originally in 2017, started doing the content thing. So we've been doing our shows since 2018, which is really cool. And then, in 2021, it was, one thing that's interesting about doing the podcast and shows like this, and when the bear markets hit, it keeps you close, right? Like everybody has the urge to, go away or not pay as close attention. But when you're doing stuff like this, it kind of keeps you tapped into what's going on, because, you're always putting stuff out. So in 2020 and 2021, when the NFT boom really started happening, I was in a really interesting position in which we were already making content. We were already doing podcasts. And I was specifically super interested in like play to earn gaming at the time. There was a lot of really cool stuff going on with blockchain gaming. And I was really interested in like Axie Infinity. And so I was tweeting about it all the time and just like putting out what I learned. Nothing crazy, nothing spectacular. I was not an expert, but it was a thing that a lot of people were interested in learning about at the time. So somebody by the name of Drew Austin reached out to me. He is a VC guy. He's a project founder in the NFT space as well. And he reached out to me and he's like, "Hey, I saw, your tweets on Axie Infinity. I'm having an event. I called it a retreat, but it's definitely a party." And so he's like, "I'm having this thing at my house and here's who's coming. And I'd love for you to come over and chat about play to earn gaming with us." And I was like, "Awesome, Drew. This sounds great." The guest list was like a bunch of people I felt like I didn't belong in the same room at the time. And I was like, "Awesome. What weekend is it? I'll be there." He's like, "Oh, it's actually Tuesday." I'm like, "Oh," like that was like my heart sank, because I had a full-time job. I was working in the medical field. I was supposed to be traveling. I was supposed to be in Pittsburgh for the days that this thing was going to happen. And so I made the very degen decision to quit my job to go to this party. And I quit the couple days prior. And at the time I had just bought a new house and had a 6-month-old, and my wife is a stay-at-home mom. So it's quite the risk I took, and results are atypical. Wow. Don't try this at home type of stuff. But I went to the party and I met there Adam Brotman. And Adam Brotman, if you don't know, he is the former chief digital officer of Starbucks, former CEO and president of J. Crew. And him and I just hit it off immediately at this event. And we probably talked for like 10 hours that day. And then, but the next week we were working together in the space, and Forum3 was formed shortly after that with another gentleman named Andy Sack. And that was July 2021. And, fast forward to today, Forum3 just helped launch Starbucks Odyssey, which is their Web3 loyalty extension program. And, we're working with some really, really major brands and businesses, are global and huge in recognition, and to help bring, Web3 NFTs in the scope of like loyalty and customer engagement to the forefront. And I think, it's just so cool because I'm kind of very fortunate, obviously. And like I said, don't try this at home, not the typical story, but being able to just be kind of like on the front line of adoption for this stuff with these brands has been really cool. So yeah, that's my story and where I came from and where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, as you describe your entry into full-time Web3, it is pretty crazy that you made that decision. But at the same time, there was clearly a reason, right? Like you knew, you had that feeling of this might be my big break here, and this is something I can't miss. And so you have to respect when, that gut feeling when you just know it's the time.
Yeah, and it's funny, that's like what it was. And it was this thing, it was like this perfect storm of time, like in time where, you were just coming out of COVID, and during COVID, I like stopped traveling. I used to travel 3 nights a week for work at my medical sales job. And when COVID hit, I stopped doing it. I like realized, oh, I never want to do that again. And so I spent that time that I had back for myself during COVID to like really lean into kind of making my way to get out of that full-time job, like the 9 to 5 type of stuff. And so I was doing all of these random things, trying to build up income streams that would get me to a place where I eventually could when the time was right. And it just felt like, okay, this was it. And I was going to regret it forever if I didn't go. And I just kind of bit the bullet, and it turned out good.
It's like when you're networking and you take a risk like that to go kind of offbeat like that. I think it's partly when kind of thing. Like you have a gut feeling on an intuition and take the leap. So Forum3 and Starbucks, two big topics. With Forum3, you're consulting with brands, helping bring in this Web3 experience, and just want to pick your brain a little bit on the basics there. The current state of loyalty programs, the value that you can bring in with using these types of technologies for these experiences and experiential marketing and everything. So if you could maybe just walk us through the vision and the flywheel of the Forum3 thesis.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's funny that you actually use the word flywheel. We talk about this a lot at Forum3, and Adam and I, and with Andy. And it's interesting because I mentioned like the reason I went to this thing was because I was interested in like the play to earn gaming stuff. And Forum3 kind of was born out of this interest in these play to earn gaming type of mechanics. And so we were experimenting with a lot of stuff there when we first started. And what we realized with a lot of the games that were going, like the Axie Infinities and all of these other blockchain games, was that like the economic model was broken in them, in the sense that when you think about like the play to earn gaming mechanics as you saw them last year in all these games, is they require like the user to be, or the customer to be, the one that's actually powering the economy, right? Like they're providing capital and getting assets, and what that ends up turning into is an ecosystem that's very extractive, right? Because all the participants are trying to do is get ROI as fast as they possibly can. And what happens is when you have a system like that, it's unsustainable. And so when we're watching all of these things happen, we kind of had this thesis of, what if you took models like this, where people are playing a game or people are participating in something, and the rewards are not coming from other customers, but they're coming from a kind of bigger centralized entity, right? Like we were looking at things like Steppen, if you remember Steppen, which was like the move to earn, right? And like there's such a clear model to me in like how Steppen should like power their ecosystem, where it shouldn't be based on customers buying shoes and stuff. It's like there's a really interesting sponsorship model there where like,
Mhm.
you know, they could have sponsorship rewards from Nike of the world or other shoe companies or things like that. And so I say that because, you know, we thought about that as a model, and essentially when you tie those really easily into loyalty programs and engagement models and things like that, where, you know, there's how we see the world right now from a loyalty perspective, just in the traditional sense, is like, especially with Starbucks is a great example. Starbucks has one of the biggest, if not the biggest, most successful traditional loyalty programs in the world. But when you break it down, it's very transactional and linear. I'm getting incremental spend as Starbucks and incremental visits from you. And in return, I'm giving you stars that equate to discounts, right? And so that's very transactional. It's one way, and there's no kind of fun layer there. So our whole thesis was you could take Web3 technology and you can build this kind of gamified rewards layer, and with a brand the as recognized and powerful as Starbucks, you have the entity that can kind of reward properly, right? Which was the missing piece from those play to earn games. So I always talk about it as like unlocking the intangible brand value that Starbucks has, right? So when you think about what that means, it's Starbucks, this massive company, and they have massive brand. They have the ability to partner with any other brand, artist, musician on the planet, and they do, and they have, and they've had a history of doing that. But in the past, you there's been no way to actually share that value that Starbucks has accrued over the years with consumers. And so, but when you build a loyalty layer like this, a Web3 powered loyalty layer in which you can reward holders and participants that are, you know, doing the most work inside of your ecosystem, for lack of a better term, and you're being able to reward them with things of value, not only from a collectible standpoint, but things that may have cultural value, things that may have dick value, and things like that. Now you're changing the reward mechanic from something that is a direct cost item to something that actually builds a deeper relationship with your customer. And it's really an interesting thing to watch happen as we're launching this project or this platform, and you're really seeing it already happen. And then, you know, there's this, go back to the word flywheel, there's this really interesting thing that happens where, you know, customer and there you add things like community to that, right? So Starbucks has never really had this, you know, the program always before has been a single player game, right? It's me versus my coffee, right? And now you've got this community aspect to it where it's multiplayer. It's you have people in a Discord chat talking about what kind of coffees they're ordering in the morning and how they're going to get their next stamp and all of this stuff. And, you know, it's just really interesting phenomenon that is happening here. So there's a lot to probably unpack from what I even just said, but the basics are, you know, this unlocking the intangible brand value, right? So it's a different way to reward that is driving more customer engagement, deeper customer relationship that is actually in line with Starbucks brand values and what they're trying to accomplish.
And that makes sense because like a lot of these major brands, you know, they have their core business, but that's not necessarily what their vision or ethos is. A lot of ones like Starbucks have these bigger, more grandiose like ideas they want to do, like create a more sustainable, like, you know, route for the coffee that's being made. So all these different ways are kind of, you can bring communities together over something like this loyalty program where you're doing potentially more than just buying coffee with it. And then there's always that side where you just get cool stuff and people love that.
Well, it's totally right. And so what I think is really interesting about what you just said there is that's exactly how this deeper relationship with the customer is being formed, right? So when you just to describe what Odyssey is, right? So it's a kind of extension off of the current loyalty program with kind of this gamification layer to it, right? So you log in to Starbucks Odyssey with your normal Starbucks rewards login. So right there, super important, right? You've got the connection point between real world, what people are used to, and then this kind of new ecosystem that we're building. So that's super important. But once you log in, you're presented with all of these like kind of, I would call them like quest like things. We call them journeys inside of Odyssey, right? And each journey has a theme. Each journey has kind of different checkpoints related to that theme. And then most have some sort of kind of purchase element to them that does drive core business activity, right? So for example, you just mentioned like sustainability, right? It's a huge core value of Starbucks as a brand. And now for the first time, they can actually express that directly to the customer and have them engage with that. So there's they call it bean to cup journey that's going on in Odyssey right now. And you had to kind of come in, you had to answer, some sustainability questions about how Starbucks is, what they're doing for sustainability. And then there was actually a portion where to promote sustainability, instead of going and ordering to go, bring in your own tumbler and get you an order in your tumbler, and that's a menu item, so it gets scanned, you pay with your app, and that can get tracked. So you're earning points that way. And then there's like the traceability tool that they have, where you bought a bag of beans and you scanned where it came from, and you could see the whole supply chain, right? And it's just like stuff you would never think of when you think of like buying your coffee every morning. But once you're doing it, you're realizing, oh, I'm learning things about Starbucks, I'm learning things about the brand, and I'm learning things about the culture. And that's really powerful, and it's had a direct impact. So you kind of hit both sides there. There is core business driving activities, and there is this idea of spreading the brand ethos.
Yeah, that's interesting, because not often will a customer necessarily go to your page, let's say starbucks.com or what have you, and actually read your vision or your mission statement, right? It's hard to get that messaging across. But if you can work it into their everyday tasks or what they're doing, that now there's a little bit more engagement. And then on top of that, you're getting feedback from your core customers, which is the ones you really want to hear from.
Yeah. So really interesting point on what you just said is, so the first journey is called the heritage journey. And the first task on there is you take this really cool, immersive, virtual coffee farm tour of their coffee farm in Costa Rica. And what's really interesting about this is that piece of content has existed for years, and nobody ever engages with it, right? And so, like you just mentioned, right, Starbucks, for in this example, has history of all of this amazing content around their brand, right? Like this virtual coffee farm tour that's very cool, all this coffee education that is super really rich and awesome, and it just lived out there for years and nobody ever engaged with it, right? And so
Right.
when you take that type of content and you're rewarding for it and making it gamified, and kind of taking somebody on this journey with you, the impact is incredible. Like I said, that content's been out there for a long time, but repurposing it in this way and rewarding folks for it is the secret kind of unlock of this, right? And so, just to expand on the Web3 of it all on Odyssey, right? So you come in, you complete these journeys, and when you complete each journey, you get what we're calling a stamp. The stamp is actually an NFT, right? So it's a Polygon blockchain asset. And what's cool about these is there's actually points embedded in the metadata, right? So like another thing is, you've never really been able to own those loyalty points, right? They're the stars that you get at Starbucks are just kind of on their database. You can't transfer them, you can't gift them, you can't do anything, right? For here, you can actually own your stamp that has points. Those points level you up inside the Odyssey experience. You can also kind of there's an internal marketplace there, so you can buy, sell, trade your stamps, all things like that. And the purpose of the game is to increase your complete journeys, collect your stamps, increase your level in the game, and then be rewarded for that, right? So on top of that, you have these, like at certain points in the game, at certain levels, you'll be eligible for like quarterly claim windows for rewards. You'll be eligible for surprise and delight airdrops. You'll be eligible for these really cool collaborations that we're putting together. And then on top of that, like once all these stamps start to come out there, you can really paint a picture of who's engaging most in your ecosystem. And you can create these kind of like sets or challenges or program back to previous stamps and do all these really cool mechanics on rewarding the people who have participated the most. So it's not a play to earn, it's not a pay to play, it's a participate to earn, right? Like participate to reward, right? And so yeah, it's a really cool thing that we've put together here, and I hope that it's got a very cool impact on the space. You know, Starbucks has a 27 million 30-day active rewards members, right? And so if this rolls out to, you know, a fraction of that, it's more wallets than exist in the space at the moment, right? So, you know, it's a really cool opportunity to introduce people to the power of this technology, you know, and in a way that's like really kind of frictionless for the user. So that's another point that, you know, is worth touching on, is like the experience is kind of a, I would say, web 2.5, in the sense that like one of the big goals that we had was to be able to have like my grandmother use it, right? So, or my mom use it. So you come in, and our Web3 backend for this platform is powered by Nifty Gateway Gemini. So what that means is that there is a custodial option. So you come in, you don't need to set up a wallet when you log in. You're just logging in with your Starbucks rewards account, and you're earning stamps. If you want to sell them, that's the time you go to the marketplace. You're automatically provisioned a kind of a custodial Odyssey wallet. And what's cool about that, though, is we wanted to be able to give the option to self custody, right? So for two reasons. One, we want people in the space that are Web3 native, crypto native, to be able to participate in a way that they feel like they can self custody these assets that they're earning. And then two, I think it's a really cool opportunity for people to kind of graduate, right? Like we saw it with NBA Top Shot. Everybody came in, Top Shot made it super easy to buy, super easy to transact. You didn't really necessarily need to know these were NFTs or not. And then what happened was people learned about the technology and kind of moved themselves onto things on Ethereum, right? Or, you know, Polygon or wherever. And they kind of graduated into this self-custody decentralization thing. And so I think that's what we can accomplish here too, with proper education backing it, right? But what's cool is you have the option, right? So it's not all custodial. It's, you have the self-custody option. And yeah, so hopefully it's an onboarding tool as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you a bit about like why blockchain, but I think you kind of answered it. I mean, really allowing the user or the loyalty member to have ownership over those loyalty assets, and then being able to do what they want with it.
Yeah, I think there's a
And I mean,
couple
yeah.
more interesting points there too, where so
Mhm.
one, you just nailed it, but with those two items. But additionally, like when you're rewarding somebody with something that is supposed to be a collectible, right? Or something, a collectible with utility added, if you just did that on a database, right, with no ownership method or no provenance, like you don't really feel like you own it, right? So and that's number one. But then there's this really interesting thing that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about yet, that I think is going to be a very cool thing in the future. And it's almost like it has to do with this concept of interoperability and almost like business interoperability, right? By Starbucks making these Polygon assets that are all out there on the Polygon blockchain, technically anybody can come and stack utility onto a Starbucks user, right? And so there's some really interesting things you can think about there. And so whenever I use this, somebody says to me, well, why would Starbucks want all their customer data out there? Wouldn't they be pissed if Dunkin' Donuts came and started rewarding their customers? And I said, I don't know. I think that sounds pretty cool to me if I'm a Starbucks customer, because if I'm getting rewarded now from other companies because I'm a Starbucks power user, where am I assigning that value as a user? I'm not assigning it to the company that rewarded me. I'm assigning it to Starbucks because that's what got me the thing, right? And so when you think about that, that's kind of like this counterintuitive, like mind blow thing where it starts to, open up all these other possibilities. And then the other thing is like collaborations within businesses or creators or anything like that, right? Because these are open assets. And here's a great example from Starbucks. Starbucks launched shortly, not too long ago, they announced something called Reward Together. And they'd been working on this Rewards Together thing for many years. And their first launch partner was Delta. It's a very cool program. It's designed to essentially have, Starbucks loyalty members cross with Delta loyalty members and kind of share rewards across, users that match both. And but it took them years to roll out, because when you think about what a collaboration that size looks like, you have all of these closed proprietary data systems that have to talk to each other through APIs, and it takes a ton of dev time and all of this. Well, now what if Delta just puts up a wallet aware page in which you come and connect to prove you're a Starbucks rewards member, and it's as easy as that. So it makes these collaborations between companies that or creators or anything super easy. And I think that's something that not a lot of people are thinking about now, that is going to be big in the future, because it just allow, like, we're playing this as brands, as creators, as everything. It's like attention economy game, right? And so part of that is staying relevant, and part of staying relevant is doing collaborations. And I think we're seeing it all the time in brands. It's more and more people are doing collabs, and anytime you like these open assets make collaborating and this kind of idea of like reward stacking really interesting and easy.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like you mentioned, that was something I was going to bring up, was like, what's stopping from a competitor coming onto, the Polygon and looking at, hey, look at all these users that are using Starbucks. I want to start, advertising or offering to them. But you basically answered that in the sense that it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it creates a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think it is a bad thing. And I think, like the Dunkin' is the extreme example, right? Because they're a very direct competitor with Starbucks. But even in that situation, I think if Dunkin' comes and gives every Starbucks user a $5 gift card, one, that's an extreme cost to Dunkin', right? So it's indirect measurable value though too, because like I said, I think a customer is actually going to assign that value of that thing to Starbucks because that's what got them that, right? It's like,
Yep.
whenever you get airdropped something new, it's because of what you've owned in the past. So you have more of a relationship to the thing that got you there, right? And I think that's like a counterintuitive thing that people have a hard time wrapping their head around. But like, that's the extreme example. But let's use a different example, right? Where it's an artist, and an artist wants to get their work out, and they're going to go, and they know that Starbucks customers have a rich history of art and culture. So I'm going to airdrop a piece of my work to all these Starbucks holders in hopes I can maybe, get some exposure easily, and to somebody that might be sticky, right? Like, and rather than just trying to, grind Twitter followers or whatever. There's a lot of really interesting things. Or even like, another opportunity would be discounting, right? So let's take a coffee bean grinder company, right? They've got this really cool grinder. They're going to, instead of having to do some kind of official collaboration with Starbucks, they could come and say, hey, Starbucks holders, come connect to my site and I'll give you 20% off this awesome coffee grinder. And like, that's pretty cool if you're a Starbucks customer, right? And so it goes into this thing of where the power is back into the customer's hands, power is back into the create or into the user hands with their data, and that but the value assignment comes from the original entity, I think. And so there's just so many cool possibilities I think we'll see in the future with that stuff.
That is a great point. I mean, you could see a business create an entire ecosystem around its loyalty program, like external. I mean, that's the community aspect, I suppose. But
Totally.
That's fascinating. Yeah, you really got me kind of thinking about that. I know we only have a couple minutes left. There are two quick things I want to touch on with you before we hop off. First, this is the year ahead. You guys at Forum3 just raised a pretty good round, 10 million. And in the press release, you outlined 3 growth initiatives. You want to build out your platform, create a set of community and content tools, and scale your digital advisory. So across those 3 pillars, I mean, what should we expect to see from Forum3 in, I guess, the next year? Because I know that's a lot of, those are some big goals.
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, first and foremost, we're leaning into the consulting areas, I think, because, off the back of this, we've gotten so much inbound, and we see a really good opportunity there to help a lot of companies kind of wrap their heads around this. And I think, from our standpoint, the more we can get people thinking about this technology in this way, the better it is for everybody, and ultimately whatever we end up building for a platform, right? So because the more people that are comfortable using this, more comfortable thinking about loyalty in this way, the better that will be down the line, right? So then secondly, we do have plans to go out and build a platform. We're not quite sure exactly yet what that is going to look like. I think the main thing that we want to do is take this concept of like the customer journey concept, the Starbucks Odyssey journey concept, that I really think is kind of the special sauce of Odyssey, and figure out a way to package that in a platform that makes it accessible for anybody, right? Whether that's a medium to small size brand. I think, one of the things we'll see is a lot of massive brands are going to do more Odysseys and dot swooshes and things like that. But there's going to need to be something for medium and small size brands or creators or influencers or things like that. Anybody, I mean, with this technology, it's so crazy. Like anybody or anything could create a loyalty program. And so I think the concept of like these journey in a box type things, I think is where, we see some value there. And then I think there's a lot that we can do in just to lead the thought leadership behind this kind of stuff, right? And so I think you'll see us make content of our own around these concepts that we can, utilize to educate and onboard, and not only users, but to brands and people that might be looking to utilize this stuff for their business.
Excellent. And so it sounds like you're mostly focused on working with brands right now versus creators or artists. Is that accurate? I mean, if people are listening and want to reach out, and they might be in these different buckets, so I just want to make sure that for the audience, we're
at the end of the day, what our specialty is this concept of loyalty, and where we think that we have, something really unique is this experiential loyalty with the Web3 component, right? So where does loyalty fit most right now? It's with brands. So I believe, from these brands and business standpoint, that's kind of our focus for now. But I think there's tons of really cool stuff coming down the pike for creators. That's not our focus right now. We're more in the kind of brand and business bucket of that. But yeah, so because at the end of the day, I think what we are is a loyalty company, and that utilizes, and specializes in Web3.
Gotcha. Well, I know we're running up on time. That's really great conversation. Really glad to have you on, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, this was awesome. I'm glad I got to join you guys. I hope to come back someday soon and we'll chat some more.
Yeah,
Can't wait.
Sure. Pleasure having you.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
See ya.